Dear Diary, I had finally completed my mission. I had relieved all 4 spirits from the evil masks, and I could have ended the game right then and there, but I wasn't quite ready. The game had given me a lot of headache and frustrations, but it seemed a waste to come this far and not try to collect all 20 masks. I also wanted to get as many heart pieces as possible because I knew the boss was going to be a tough one. I started out by collecting all the lantalities from the business scrubs and getting the nearby heart pieces. It was a lot of traveling back and forth, but at this point, I was used to that shit. At least I knew right where everyone was. Then I decided to do something that I had never really done in this game. I stayed in town for the duration of the 3-day cycle and just talked to people. I went into shops and shooting galleries trying to collect the prizes. On the very last night in the curiosity shop, I found an interesting mask for sale, called the All-Night Mask. I think it's called that because once you see it, you'll have nightmares all night. Its main ability was to keep Link awake, which didn't really make sense because I personally haven't seen Link sleep since the beginning of Ocarina of Time, when Link was snoozing in his tree bed. But I bought it anyway and tried it on because who hasn't wanted to be Hannibal Lecter for a day? Oh, no one else? I wasn't sure what to do with this mask until I talked to the wheelchair goblin, and she wanted to tell me a couple of stories. Now, normally I'm guessing because the stories are so damn long, and Link can't sit through more than a couple of minutes without interjecting a "Hi-ya!" he falls asleep, thus the need for the all-night mask. I actually learned some really interesting facts about Clocktown's history and culture. I feel like I should have done this at the beginning of the game, but it's too late now. Anyway, the old lady told me that the town throws an annual Carnival of Time to celebrate the 4 giants who protect their world. Everyone wears masks to resemble gods, and that also explains the mask madness in town. The second story was much longer and about the 4 giants. Basically, they decided to break the world into 4 parts and keep watch over the land while they were dormant. The Skull Kid was pretty pissed that his friends decided to leave him and started causing a ruckus. The giants woke up and said, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Get your ass back to heaven before we rip you to pieces." And the Skull Kid was like, "Alright." So yeah, I guess the most fascinating aspect was that the Skull Kid had been around for as long as he had, and the friends he was bitching about at the beginning of the game were actually these 4 giants. It's also worth mentioning that I went back to the milk bar and played some music for the Zora manager, and while I thought I sounded like I was banging on trash can lids, it brought evil Luigi to tears, and he gave me his face as a mask. Okay, 2 things about this mask. It did absolutely nothing except cry. And second, who carries a mask of their own face? Isn't that counterproductive? But the big beast of a side quest was Anju and cafes, which spanned the length of the entire 3 days. These 2 knuckleheads were about to get married, until Cafe straight up disappeared without a word. I talked to his mother, and she implored me to investigate his disappearance, and gave me his mask to help. Like, how is this gonna help? Am I supposed to walk up to people and say, "Hey, have you seen me anywhere?" But surprisingly, that worked. I found Anju, who worked at the Stockpot Inn, and she told me to come back at 11:30 to talk to her. She wouldn't give me any information until later. So I waited until a little before midnight and met up with her in the kitchen. That had bugs, by the way. You should call an exterminator. She then handed me a letter. So you wanted me to meet you here at midnight so you could give me a letter for me to put in a mailbox right outside your inn. You couldn't have handed me that letter earlier in the day or taken it to the mailbox yourself? Okay then. She explained that she was scared to go look for Cafe herself and asked me to help her. Yeah, sure, whatever. So the next day I had to follow the mailman around until he came to a suspicious little kid who had the same hair as Cafe. I had seen this kid hanging around before, but children are like furniture. They just decorate the room. While he was distracted, I slipped into his room and waited. There he completely spilled his guts and told me that he was the real Cafe. The Skull Kid had just turned him into a little kid, but he didn't care about that. He only wanted his sun mask back, which had been stolen by a thief. Pretty sure if you're gonna get married, you're gonna have to get out of that little kid body. But I also guess that's none of my business. But yeah, icky. He then gave me an amulet to give back to Anju with the message for her to wait for him. He was going to stay there and wait for the thief to show up, since the curiosity shop caters to shady individuals. After that, not a single thing happened until the third day. I went back to see Cafe, but he was gone, and instead the guy who ran the curiosity shop was hanging out. He told me that Cafe had followed a thief back to Iconic Canyon, and then he gave me a fox mask, which I don't know what I'm supposed to do with. And then he gave me a letter to send to Cafe's mother. Alright, there's a lot of mail going on in this game, and I don't understand why people can't use the mailboxes themselves. I went to Iconic Canyon and found Cafe creeping by some rocks. He had found the thief's hideout and was going to wait for him, but he didn't show up until later that night, and it turned out the thief was none other than Mr. Clean Out Your House himself. Inside we found the stolen sun mask, but as expected it was a trap, and I had to help him recover it. The first time I played through this sequence, I failed, and Tattle urged me to use the Song of Soaring to get out of there. But what about Cafe? The moon was about to crash down, and he was stuck in here, far away from his loved ones. On my second try, we succeeded, and I went back to Clocktown to do some last-minute things while I waited for Cafe. I gave the letter I had been carrying to the mailman, who was scared shitless, but too loyal to abandon his post. Once he gave the letter to Cafe's mother, she relieved him of his duties, and he gave me his hat in return, before fleeing the city for good. Diary, spending time in Clocktown on the final day was new to me. It was interesting to see the change in all the characters. Most of them went from happy-go-lucky and denying that the moon would fall, to begging for their lives. The old man was sobbing in the back of his shop, the guards had their hands placed over their hearts, and the milk bar owner mentioned his wish to see his favorite customer one last time. As the game came to a close, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. I watched as characters struggled against the loss of time and their own mortality. I felt completely helpless to do anything. I could only wait for Cafe, and as the time ticked down, I started to get nervous. Maybe I had messed up somewhere along the way, and Cafe wasn't coming. I checked Anju's room, and there she was, sitting on her bed beside her wedding dress, repeating that she'd wait for him. Finally, with less than 2 minutes left, Cafe appeared and rushed to Anju's side. I watched while they embraced and exchanged masks in a sort of impromptu wedding ceremony. In exchange for helping them, they gave me my final missing mask, the couple's mask, and told me to seek refuge. They were ready to greet the morning, together. For the first time, I felt an actual knot in my throat, but I didn't have time to linger. I had to save my game, resetting the 3-day cycle to play through one last time. Until next time, Diary, your friend, Brittany Saturn.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world.